thing you might want to keep in mind is when I've heard some people talk about unconscious installation, particularly those who don't know what it is, they make it sound like it's a procedure. It's not. It's a description of a whole domain of learning and practice. So how is it done? Well, it happens in ordinary life. Even the processes that people think one has to go through in order to do conscious learning are unconscious learning. They're presumptions about procedure that have to be observed. They, for the most part, just hammered into someone through repetition. When we're talking about using unconscious learning in order to teach, that might involve any number of different possibilities. It might be, if we're talking in a one-to-one situation, it might be through anecdote, telling stories about times when, using the whatever the skill is that we're talking about, and putting it into a story, into an anecdote about when I was learning how to do it or when somebody else was learning how to do it, and then very gently introducing what the process is in the context of the story, in quotes as it were. So that might come into it a bit. There might be some talk in addressing the person's attitude in order to get their attitude to a suitable place where they'll be able to do whatever it is that's going to be done. So for some people who are watching and listening to this, they will know that the state that you're in is mission critical to what you're able to do. And if your state isn't helpful, if you can't raise the requisite energy level in order to do what you need to do, it doesn't matter what the procedure is. State first, then the structures, then the content. So, other things that might go into unconscious learning. There might be a number of demonstrations, but not demonstrations like, now I'm going to show you step one, now I'm going to show you step two. Those tend to bring up in people the perception that they have to take notes and get it all into their head the first time. When we're talking about acquiring skills unconsciously, it isn't important that somebody has a conscious representation. That conscious representation is the last thing they need. Understanding is the end of the learning process, not the beginning. I don't care what somebody's been told. I don't care what they've been conditioned into and what disabilities they've acquired along the way. If you have to have an understanding of everything before you can do something, you've been disabled as a learner. Largely, that's what the university and public school system does. Disables people, prevents them from exploring, prevents them from knowing how to put patterns together. That's what NLP can help you with, can help you to rediscover our natural abilities, our natural critical reasoning skills, our natural ability to pattern. Anyway, back to unconscious learning. Oh, by the way, did you notice I took a little side road while we were talking? One of the things that we can do when we're using unconscious learning is we set up, it's almost like a series of folders, topic folders, where we talk about one thing, we talk about another thing, we talk about a third thing. And they're all related somehow, but it's not quite clear how they're related yet. And in the course of that description of telling an anecdote about an anecdote, making an aside, there's a higher order summary that they all fit into. So it's putting the pieces out on the table without starting from a frame first. It's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together or laying out the pieces without actually going to the sharp edges. See, the thing is, if somebody thinks they understand something, what tends to happen is they stop learning. Understanding is the end of the learning process, not the beginning. And I know that some people have been hypnotized through their educational career into thinking that the way that you learn is by tying every new phenomenon to something they've already learned or understood. But that's not learning. That's merely extending archetypal patterns they already have. For us, what we're interested in is how to explore where there's no map, and how to go further than you've gone before, and then how to exceed the boundaries of your patterns. You aren't going to do it by constantly referring back to everything you think you know and understand. Anyway, by the way, there's a loop in a loop. So there's all kinds of things that we can do within the context of that interaction and that communication. And if you do it right, and if you get the pieces in the right order, and stacked up in the right way, and get the right responses from someone, what happens is when you're done, and you've gone through 3, 4, 5 different kinds of demonstration, through story, through example, perhaps through, while we're talking, actually showing something, actually going through it. By the time it's time to give an overt demonstration of what we're talking about, the person's mind is already primed, as it were, is ready, has all the file folders set up, and it only takes 1 or 2 demos, and then they're in and moving along at quite a rate of speed, quite a clip in terms of being able to do whatever it is we're talking about. It's not an impossible thing to do, but it does require effort, and it does require a lot of different skill sets coming together at the same time. I know people would like to have a magic pill or a special technique or something that, all I have to say is, if you drink the right kind of coffee, you'll be able to do nested loops and unconscious installation patterns and all the rest of that. Well, the right kind of coffee does help, especially when you're in a foreign country, surrounded by children. Where were you? Ah, there you are. So, there are lots of different skill sets that come together. These include understanding how a strategy operates within an NLP context. Literally how strategies function and move from step to step to step to step to step. Before you can do something like these things called nested loops, which are basically using communication that has multiple themes, which sit within broader stories, kind of like a nested Chinese box. Before you can do that, you have to be able to work with, like the tote model, the test, operate, test, exit loops. Be able to track how you communicate what you're doing and where you are. We're here. And the hot chocolates have arrived for all the kiddies. You need to have a grasp of the language models, and I'm not just talking about able to memorize a few phrases. I'm talking about you have to understand how causal modeling works, how you instantiate an idea with a particular generalization, how generalizations are built and how they're taken apart. You have to have an ability to tell stories. You've got to be able to use anecdote and metaphor, simile, all the rest of those rhetorical tools, but use them in the context of a conversation. It's not a formal storytelling thing or like reading off of a script of somebody else. You also have to be able to take feedback in terms of be able to notice what's going on, what's being responded to while you're talking. It's a good idea if you can work with ridiculous amounts of noise going on around you. There's a lot of skills that go into it. So, if somebody wants to learn how to do unconscious installation, by the way, it's also not about hypnosis. I should say that upright. Unconscious installation does not imply hypnosis. Unconscious installation, unconscious learning is how it works when we don't have a teacher there. For the most part, people are not aware of their learning strategies, are not aware of how they take in pattern and then generalize from whatever comes in. Unconscious installation makes use of those patterns, but it doesn't necessarily imply hypnosis. Rather than become aware of unconscious installation, let's talk about how we present things in such a way that it doesn't draw conscious attention to it. Giving examples of things via anecdote is one way, as Richard Bandler once told me. Blah, 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 blah. And then put the examples in. So using that quotations pattern is one way that you can start, except you just put an example of using something or of doing something along with the process instruction. in the quotation marks. That's a relatively simple thing that you can practice. Paying attention to things like at home, family rituals. You have a certain way that you run in the morning, you have certain kind of dinner time rituals, whatever it is. Just pay attention to them and start inquiring into them, where they came from, when and how they arose. Start noticing that for the most part they weren't actually decisions, they just sort of happened. And then they became traditions. Anytime somebody says, it's a tradition, I tend to run away now. It's just somebody's unconsciousness, being imposed on everyone else. It's a tradition. Every year I try and make new traditions, particularly at family holidays. So, paying attention to the rituals. Also, you can do this in the office, you can do it anywhere where you have social interactions. Notice the rituals of relationship that you engage in, the rituals of work performance. Just start inquiring into where they came from. You'll find that these unconscious learning processes are occurring pretty much all the way across life. From the moment you get into a car and you're driving, most of that was acquired through unconscious learning. In fact, it could be argued that a lot of the study that you tried to do about driving actually got in the way of you actually learning how to do it.